Om Agyanatimirandasya Gyananjana Salakaya Chaksurun Militam Yena Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha Sri Chaitanya Manobhistam Svapidam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupagadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam. So welcome to the Sunday feast. Nice to see a healthy crowd, healthy in size and in quality. Anyone here today for the first time? All been here before. I recognise all of you, so that's confirmed. Today's talk is entitled Knowledge or Nescience, Lessons from Sri Isopanishad. This is Sri Isopanishad, and we've got some lovely copies here today. If you'd like to take a copy home with you, this is one of the earliest books that I read actually when I met the devotees. It's one of the first books that the founder of the Hare Krishna movement, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, published in establishing the Hare Krishna movement in the Western world in 1969. Actually, this year marks the 50th anniversary of Sri Isopanishad, 1969 to 2019. Another good reason to take a copy home with you today. Special anniversary copy. Has anyone here read Sri Isopanishad? Me too. Right. Wonderful book. Srila Prabhupada composed the Sri Isopanishad with the same scholarly grit, the Sanskrit verses, the English translations, the word for word, as you're going to see there on the screen, word for word, Sanskrit, English equivalents, and the translation and the purports. Prabhupada wrote that in respect to this scholarly presentation, Prabhupada said that this makes the book very authentic and scholarly and makes the meaning self-evident. Actually, when this book was first published, it received rave reviews from scholars, such as this one, which I'll read. Dr. Thomas N. Papas, Professor of English and History at Anderson University, wrote that, quote, "The first available English edition of Sri Isopanishad makes this scholarly, this most significant publication accessible to a broader public of students and scholars. This spiritual law book is a necessary supplement to any serious study of Vedic culture." A necessary supplement to any serious study of Vedic culture. You may ask, what is Vedic culture? Vedic culture means that culture which is based on the knowledge found in the Vedic literatures. And then, of course, the next question may be, what are the Vedic literatures? The Vedic literature, the term Vedic literature, refers to the four Vedas, that is the Rig Veda, the Sama Veda, the Artava Veda, and the Yajur Veda, as well as the Vedanta Sutra, the Upanishads, the Mahabharata, and the Itihasas, or the histories, or the Puranas, featuring the most important of all the Puranas, the Bhagavata Purana, known also as the Srimad Bhagavatam. So between all of those, this comprises a vast treasure trove of knowledge, literally millions of Sanskrit verses, or shlokas as they're known. And the word Veda literally means knowledge. In the introduction to Isopanishad, Prabhupada actually spoke a very nice lecture in London's Conway Hall in 1960 how the Vedic teachings are actually perfect, because Vedic sound is known as Shabda Brahma, is not of this world. It's not man-made, not created by man, and thus it is not subject to human frailties and imperfections. So today we're going to be discussing one verse from the foremost of the Upanishads, known as the Sri Isa Upanishad. There are 108 Upanishads. And the 108 Upanishads, being part of the Vedic canon, contain all knowledge about the absolute truth presented specifically in a concise, condensed form. As an interesting aside, Vaishnavas, or aspirant Vaishnavas, like myself, we all have beads called Japamala, and there's 108 beads. 108 beads in the Japamala. Prabhupada explained, our spiritual master explained, that because there are 108 Upanishads, we have 108 beads on our Japamala. Some Vaishnavas, some Vaishnava transcendentalists explain that the 108 beads of the Japamala represent the 108 companions of Lord Krishna in his Rasa Leela. Either way, both of those are correct. Out of the 108 Upanishads, as I mentioned, there is the Isa Upanishad, which is the foremost. There are actually 11 main Upanishads. If you are a student of Srila Prabhupada's books, or you have read some of Srila Prabhupada's books, you will notice that Prabhupada quotes voluminously. He quotes very often from the Upanishads and from many other books, but especially the Upanishads are quoted a lot, and some of these important Upanishads are listed as the Isa Upanishad, the Kena, Kata, Mundaka, Mandukya, Taittiriya, Chandogya, Svetashvatara Upanishad, etc., to name a few of those, 11. So Sri Isa Upanishad, known as Sri Isa Upanishad, the Isa, the A becomes an O when you put the words together, so Isa Upanishad, Prabhupada explains, is the most important because it presents specifically, the ultimate conclusions of Vedic philosophy, and specifically because it directs our attention to the fact that the Supreme is a person. The Supreme Absolute Truth is personal. And that is an important understanding that we have to come to. That Supreme Person is the complete whole of existence, and all manifestations, as explained in the Upanishads, all emanations actually come from that Supreme Person. And all of those emanations from the Supreme are complete in themselves. Complete in and of themselves. And this is explained in the invocation to Isa Upanishad. Om Purnamadaha Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnam Eva Vashishyate. Very famous mantra, which you've probably heard. And the translation. Would you like to read the translation, dear?
Sure. The personality of Godhead is perfect and complete, and because he is completely perfect, all emanations from him, such as this phenomenal world, are perfectly equipped as complete wholes. Whatever is produced of the complete whole is also complete in itself. Because he is the complete whole, even though so many complete units emanate from him, he remains the complete balance.
That is a very wonderful verse, and that deserves a class of its own one Sunday. Prabhupada also explains about the Upanishads. He describes that they are like the, quote, headlines of the Vedas. Just like you read a headline, it tells you what's going on in a concise form. It's also compared to a chapter header. When you're reading a book, each chapter sometimes has a title. There's a title for the chapter, and that gives you some insight as to what's going on inside. So Srila Prabhupada has described that the Vedas are like a headline of the Vedas, the Upanishads. Just like, so the Upanishads introduce and categorize Vedic knowledge. So Upanishad, the word Upanishad means, Upa, the Sanskrit word Upa means near, and Isha means the supreme controller, God or Krishna. You might have heard the word Isha as in Ishwara, or Ishavasyam. That means pertaining to the supreme controller or God. So Sri Isopanishad means that knowledge which will bring you closer to God. And that indeed is the goal of all spiritual life. It's interesting to note that the Sri Upanishad is also the smallest of all the Upanishads. It only contains 18 mantras, actually 19 if you include the invocation, which we just chanted. So because it's so small and compact, it's easy to chant these mantras. I know when I grew up as a devotee in the Krishna consciousness movement, it was a habit that we would all chant these 18 mantras, sometimes before Srimad Bhagavatam class, after Srimad Bhagavatam class. Everybody got a good chance to learn them, to memorize the Sanskrit verses, because they're it's compact, it just takes 10 minutes or so, or less, to chant. So if you want to practice your Sanskrit chanting, if you want to read something very, very inspiring and enlightening and purifying, it's Upanishad. So today we're studying verse number 10 of Sri Upanishad. Here it is on the board. Now, shock horror that there's actually a syllable missing. I don't know how that happened, but the second line there is supposed to be an A before the N. I don't know. It's not your fault. No, it's actually missing. And in other words, the first word of the first line and the first word of the second line are actually meant to be the same. I don't know where that A went. I have to bring it up with the publishers. So just before we chant this mantra, we're going to chant it together. I'd like to point out just a few notes about Sanskrit pronunciation. 4 simple things. When you see a letter C, like the last word of the verse, vichachakshire, there's 2 C's in that word. In Sanskrit, a letter C is pronounced like in Italian as ch, as a CH. You'll also see there, let's have a look, the third line, second word, shushruma. The S with an oblique line on top is pronounced as in the German word sprechen. So iti shushruma. And then there's A with a line on top, that's called a Macron, as in President Macron of France, different meaning. The A with a line on top, you can see one of those in the second word of the first line. That means that the A is lengthened. Any letter with a line on top, it's double the length. So instead of R, it's R, as in calm, the word calm. And the fourth note is an S with a dot underneath. It's pronounced a little bit different to the one with the line on top. It's less, how would you say sprechen?
Sprechen. Yes.
Right. So there's a what does that sound in the throat? It's guttural. I think it's guttural. So that is how the S with a line on top is pronounced, but with an S with a dot underneath, it's less guttural and more sh, like that, like, as in sharp. I have a very sharp. You can fill in the blank. sense of humour, and tongue, whatever. S with a dot. So let's chant this verse. I'll chant one line and you can repeat. Anyad ivahur vidyaya. Anyad ivahur vidyaya. Anyadahur avidyaya. Anyadahur avidyaya. Iti shushrumadhiranam. Iti shushrumadhiranam. Yenastad vichachakshire. Yenastad vichachakshire. Anyadeva hura vidyaya. Anyadeva hura vidyaya. Anyadahur avidyaya. Anyadahur avidyaya. Iti shushrumadhirana. Iti shushrumadhirana. Yenastad vichachakshire. Yenastad vichachakshire. Anyadeva hura vidyaya. Anyadeva hura vidyaya. Anyadahura vidyaya. Anyadahura vidyaya. Iti shushrumadhirana. Iti shushrumadhirana. Yenastad vichachakshire. Yenastad vichachakshire. We'll read the word for word meanings. Can you scroll down? So here we go. So I'll read the Sanskrit and you can repeat, and then I'll read the English and you can repeat. Anyat. Anyat. Different. Different. Eva. Eva. Certainly. Certainly. Ahu. Ahu. Said. Said. Vidyaya. Vidyaya. By culture of knowledge. By culture of knowledge. Anyat. Anyat. Different. Different. Ahu. Ahu. Said. Said. Avidyaya. Avidyaya. By culture of nescience. By culture of nescience. Iti. Iti. Thus. Thus. Shushruma. Shushruma. I heard. I heard. Dhiranam. Dhiranam. From the sober. From the sober. Ye. Ye. Who. Who. Naha. Naha. To us. To us. Tat. Tat. That. That. Vichachakshire. Vichachakshire. Explain. Explain. And here comes the translation. The wise have explained that one result is derived from the culture of knowledge, and that a different result is obtained from the culture of nescience. I'll repeat and you can respond. The wise have explained that one result is derived from the culture of knowledge, and that a different result is obtained from the culture of nescience. So we're going to read the purport, or the commentary by Srila Prabhupada, but before we do that, I'd just like to explain something, some terminology that's used in the verse. Culture of knowledge versus the culture of nescience. So they lead to different results. You may be asking, what do you mean by nescience? We have an idea of what knowledge means, but perhaps the word nescience you're not familiar with. I looked up the dictionary to get some dictionary definitions. There's many dictionaries and many dictionary definitions, and all have different things to offer. Knowledge, for instance, is defined as facts, information, skills acquired through experience, education, theoretical or practical understanding of a subject, wisdom, and enlightenment. That's some of the dictionary definitions of knowledge. Now, the word nescience is defined as the polar opposite of knowledge. Nescience is described as the state of not knowing, lack of knowledge, lack of awareness, the mental state of the unenlightened. So the word nescience, is, as I said, is not in common use today. It's more of a literary or formal word for ignorance. And the word nescience comes from the late Latin word nescientia, which means ignorance. The word is derived from a combination of the words ne, which means not, and scientia, which means knowledge. And of course, the English word science comes from the word scientia, which means knowledge. So let's read the purport. Today's discussion is based on these points that are mentioned in the purport. As advised. No, I'll just read. You can repeat it if you like. Might take a little time. As advised in chapter 13 of the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 13, verses 8 to 12, famous verse, it starts with the words amanitvam, adambitvam, ahimsa. Krishna is explaining to Arjuna the symptoms of one in knowledge, the symptoms of a knowledgeable person. One should culture knowledge in the following way. And there's a list. The following list actually, as I said, derived from the Bhagavad Gita itself, in Krishna's own words. It is like it's like an 18-point checklist to see how far our spiritual culture has grown. So Prabhupada says here, if you scroll up a little bit, Prabhupada says one should culture knowledge in the following way. So I found that was interesting that Srila Prabhupada uses the word culture as a verb. You've heard of the word culture, we say Irish culture, modern culture, Western culture, Eastern culture. But he's using the word culture as a verb, as in to culture, which means to cultivate or to grow. Just like you can grow a culture in the laboratory. So it's a doing word. One can cultivate the spiritual culture. And this 18-point list is, as I said, spoken by Krishna himself. We can analyze this list and apply it to ourselves. If it does apply to ourselves, or if it's lacking in some way, then we know what we have to do to rectify ourselves and to develop a more spiritual way of life. So I'll read Krishna's definition of knowledge, as explained here in Srila Prabhupada's purport. Number one should become a perfect gentleman and learn to give proper respect to others. I'll repeat that. One should become a perfect gentleman and learn to give proper respect to others. So Prabhupada defines a gentleman, as in ladies and gentlemen, as one who gives proper respect to others. Now that's an interesting but very deep definition. In Sanskrit, this is called amanitvam, or humility. Humility means that one should not be anxious to have the satisfaction of being honoured by others. We all like to be honoured by others. We all like to know that our picture or our post that we just published on social media, I had 1,500 likes. There's 1,500 people that like me. We all like to be honoured. It's a normal human emotion. But Prabhupada defines that amanitvam, or humility, means we should not be anxious for having the satisfaction of being honoured by others. This is called humility. And humility can be defined in two ways, actually two sides of the same coin, of the humble coin. One side is called amanena, and the other side is called manadena. This means I don't want to receive any special honour or any honour for myself, and at the same time I am willing and able and anxious to give all honor and respect to other people. And Krishna explains in the Gita to Arjuna that this is the first step in the ladder of knowledge, or the ladder towards spiritual perfection. If we're not humble, then we can't progress in spiritual life. It's step number one. So the material concept of life, Prabhupada explains, makes us very eager to receive honour from others. But from a point of view of a man in perfect knowledge who knows that he is not this body, anything, honour or dishonour, pertaining to this body is useless, because this is not me. This body is not me. One should not be hankering after this material deception. Prabhupada calls it a deception. It's actually self-deception. For actual advancement in spiritual science, one should have a test to see how far he is progressing. He can judge by these items. So, as I said, we can judge by these 18 items how far we are progressing. We may ask ourselves, are we humble? We know. Do we enjoy being honoured by others? Of course, we all have that tendency. But do we enjoy giving honour and respect to others? That's the point of this first point. Of this first point of the 18 points. So this is the first step in spiritual life, real humility. Point number 2. One should not pose himself as a religionist simply for name and fame. One should not pose himself as a religionist simply for name and fame. So this is a more subtle type of self-deception. I'm not presenting myself as special, but I'm presenting my religion as special, in order that I become well known and famous as a religious person. It's more subtle. Prabhupada explains here in the purport that people are very anxious in the Bhagavad Gita purport to this information. People are very anxious to be famous for their religion, and consequently sometimes it is found that without understanding the principles of religion, one enters into some group which is not actually following real religious principles, and then wants to advertise himself as a religious mentor. So this is based on the bodily concept of life. If we think that we are this body, we have this tendency to think that we are the best. We like to think that we are the best, and that naturally then this mentality grows that because if everyone is thinking they're the best, there's going to be some trouble because you can't all be number one. So there is some competition, and because everyone else is also thinking they're the best, in a gross or subtle way, then everyone becomes our competitor. So then we proclaim that everything connected to me is the best. My football team is the best. My country is the best. My religion is the best. And if you're not part of my religion, then you are lesser than I am. It's interesting, if you study religious history or just religion as it is today, you'll notice that in every religious culture you'll find that a derogatory word that's there to define someone who's not a part of our religion. There's a word, you may say heathen or devil or infidel. In every religious culture there's a derogatory term to describe someone who's not a part of our group. So this stems from step number 1, point number 1, which is a lack of humility. I'm the best. And that leads to so many problems. Actually, so much strife and so much bloodshed is there in the world and in the history of the world due to this idea that I'm the best, my religion is the best, my culture is the best, I have to conquer this country, and so it goes on. So you see, without humility, society goes down very quickly. So we'll define our definition, we'll continue our definition of knowledge here with step number 3. Point number 3. One should not become a source of anxiety to others by the actions of his body, by the thoughts of his mind, or by his words. I'll read that again. One should not become a source of anxiety to others by the actions of his body, by the thoughts of his mind, or by his words. And again, a very deep point. So, if you think that you are this body, then you will naturally think you're better than everyone else, in a more or less way. Then you will naturally not hesitate, under those circumstances, to commit violence on others. It may just be the type of violence that you go to watch your favourite team play at the football stadium, and then your team loses, and so there's a big fight, and you have an argument with someone from the opposing team, and there's fisticuffs and blood and things like that. You see all these riots at football games. Whether it's something minor like that or far, far worse, those who are thinking they're better than others will not hesitate to commit violence. And in his purport to this point, in the Bhagavad Gita, Prabhupada defines what is non-violence, because this verse is encouraging us to become non-violent. We shouldn't be a source of anxiety to others, physically, mentally, or vocally. Non-violence, Prabhupada describes here, and the previous acharyas have confirmed this definition of non-violence, is generally taken to mean not killing or destroying the body, but actually, non-violence means not to put others in distress. People in general are trapped by ignorance in the material concept of life, and they perpetually suffer material pains. So unless one elevates people to spiritual knowledge, one is practicing violence. So, in other words, non-violence means to try to distribute real knowledge to others so that they can become enlightened and leave this material atmosphere. So we have point number 4. One should learn forbearance, even in the face of provocation from others. One should learn forbearance. What does forbearance mean? It means tolerance. So one should learn forbearance or tolerance, even in the face of provocation from others. So we've been speaking about this idea that I'm the best, and that there's other people who are thinking they're the best, and those people will disagree over things. So what happens if we are provoked, or we're verbally abused, or physically abused, or criticised, or things in connection with us are criticised? We're criticised, our family is criticised, our religion is criticised. What happens? What do we do? Do we fight? Or do we retaliate? Or do we practice forbearance or tolerance? Even in the face of provocation, we should be tolerant. We see in the history of the world, you have Jesus who recommended that people should turn the other cheek if they're provoked. This is in keeping with this idea. We should learn tolerance. Tolerance is defined by Krishna elsewhere as one should practice to bear insult and dishonour from others. We should practice becoming tolerant because, we should know how to. The example is given of Prahlad, the young boy, by his demonic father. And most of you know the story. Prahlad but because Prahlad was protected, the example is given that there's going to be so many impediments. When you take up real spiritual, there will be impediments. Sometimes we joined the Hare Krishna movement, we're disappointed. Sometimes our parents would have us kidnapped and locked in a house and beaten. Become a spiritual person, you will disturb others. And so the idea is that one should learn to tolerate it without being disturbed. That's all you can do. And that's an art in itself. Step number 5, or point number 5, one should learn to avoid duplicity in his dealings with others. Simplicity is the opposite of duplicity. Now, simplicity doesn't mean that you become a simpleton, but it means you say one thing to someone and say something to someone in ordinary dealing. Reading the 18 points which Krishna describes in the Bhagavad Gita, which symptomize a man or woman of knowledge. And this is described in Mantra 10 of the Sri Upanishad. 6. One should search out a bona fide spiritual master who can lead him gradually to the stage of spiritual realization. And one must submit himself to such a spiritual master, render him service and ask relevant questions. So this 6th point is very important. Very important. So if everything that we've described so far in the first 5 points have made sense to you, they do make sense. So naturally, you will want to know, well, where do we go from here? We've learnt that we're not humble, we have to become humble, we have to be tolerant. Where do we go from that point? Well, from that point, you will need to take up spiritual life in a serious, more organized fashion if you want to learn more about the science of spiritual life. And for that purpose, you will need a teacher. Just like if you want to become a medical person, you will have to go to medical school, but more important, you will have to have particular teachers in particular fields to guide you. You may say, okay, I'll just go to the library and I'll just get out all the particular books that we're going to be studying at medical college. I'll just read the books and I'll teach myself. But you won't become an authorized medical practitioner by doing that. You need a teacher. You need a medical teacher. Otherwise you won't be recognized, you won't be accepted, you won't get that certificate in your medical waiting room that all doctors have to say that you're qualified because you went to the Irish School of Surgery. What is that called? Royal College of Surgery. So you can't just get all those books out from the library and become a medical man. You need to be accepted into the School of Surgery to become a surgeon. And you will need teachers on the way. And therefore, Prabhupada describes, to explain this particular point, as far as accepting a spiritual master is concerned, that is essential. So if even understanding material, mundane activities, such as learning medicine, you need a teacher, you certainly need a teacher for understanding the subtleties of spiritual life. That's called a guru or spiritual master. As far as accepting a spiritual master, Prabhupada writes, that is essential because without the instructions of a spiritual master, one cannot progress in the spiritual science. One should approach the spiritual master with all humility and offer him service so that he will be pleased to bestow his blessings upon the disciple. It's like if you go to medical school but you're a disturbance and you create chaos in every lecture, you're shouting and screaming and disagreeing with the teachers, you won't be very popular and you probably won't pass and be accepted into the medical profession because you're not humble. You have to understand that the teacher knows better than you and you have to accept what he's saying to you, even if you don't fully understand it. So there has to be humility also in spiritual life. Krishna says to Arjuna that one has to approach the spiritual master with folded hands. Yes, one must be humble. And then one is qualified to receive knowledge. So the question will then be asked, how do we choose the right teacher? What are the qualifications of a spiritual master? So many people are saying that they know the truth. How do we know who's right and who's wrong? So this brings us to analyze the words of today's mantra a bit more carefully. Dina, if you could scroll back up to the verse, you'll see the last line of the verse. Iti shushrumadira nam yenas tad vitachakshire. Iti shushrumadira nam. Shushruma means to hear, and it means to hear submissively, like you would hear from your teacher, not in a challenging way. But who is that teacher? Dhiranam. Go back up. Dhiranam means, from the sober. You have to hear from the sober. Now that's a word that Irish people understand. Isn't it? Well, they should understand. Sober. So, what is sober? Sober means the opposite of intoxicated. And sober means a person whose senses are controlled. That is the meaning of sober. Dira nam, from the sober. The word dira means a sober person. A person who is not intoxicated. And in this case, it means a person who is literally not intoxicated, but also not intoxicated with pride, with anger, with greed, with lust, with these negative qualities. A dira is a sober person. And that means his senses are controlled. And specifically, this sobriety is described in other Vedic Shastras, such as the Sri Upadesh Amrita by Srila Rupa Goswami. He describes sobriety in its absolute form. Vacho vegam, manasa kroda vegam, jiva vegam, udara upasta vegam, etan vegam yo visaheta diraha, sarvam apimam prativim sasisyat. That a sober person is one who can, number one, control the urge to speak. We all like to gossip and talk too much. The urge to speak, one has to tolerate the urge to speak. One has to tolerate the demands of the mind. The mind is going to tell us to do all sorts of crazy things. We have to know to ignore the mind when it's rattling on and telling us all the wrong things. You have to control the mind. The mind demands us sometimes. You must do this. Some crazy thing. No. You have to control the mind. The third thing you have to control is anger. Very important. If you don't control anger, then you can get into lots of trouble. Controlling the urges of the tongue. That means eating too much or eating the wrong food. Tolerating, number 5, the urges of the belly. You've already eaten, but you want to eat more. But you already had dinner. Yeah, but I'm going to eat a packet of biscuits and drink a 6-pack of this. The tongue is out of control and the belly's full, but you want more. You want more. This is the urges of the belly. The belly has to be filled, but not unrestrictedly. And the 6th one is you have to control the genitals. If you don't control the genitals, well, so much problems. So many problems. We don't need to go into the details. So many of the world's problems are due to not controlling the genitals. And it's described that there's a straight line from the tongue to the genitals. Biologically, and also they're all connected in that way. You eat too much, and then the belly is full, and the tendency is to become lustful, slothful, and the lower qualities continue. So the opposite of adira is an adira. So these words are listed in the verse, if you could scroll up again. Just all the way up. Anyad evahur vidyaya, anyad ahur avidyaya. Okay. So there's a definition of knowledge, and the opposite of knowledge is avidya, and the opposite of dira or sober is adira. Okay. So here in the Upanishad, therefore, the Vedic method of education is given. We have to hear knowledge from a self-controlled person, someone who has his senses under control. That is the definition of a teacher that we should be understanding spiritual knowledge from. No one else. Iti shushrumadhiranam yenas tad vitachakshide. So one might ask, okay, approaching the spiritual master, what is the next step? What is the next step after approaching an authorized spiritual teacher? And if you scroll down, you'll see in the purport, there's point 7, and point 8. Point 7 reads, in order to approach the platform of self-realization, one must follow the regulative principles enjoined in the revealed scriptures. And number 8, one must be fixed in the tenets of the revealed scriptures. So, the next step, after you approach a spiritual master, he will give you a set of things to do, a to-do list, and a not-to-do list. In other words, do's and don'ts. The Guru says to the disciple, you should do this, you should not do this. It's like if you're sick, you go to the doctor. He's your medical guru, if you like. The doctor says, I'm going to give you a prescription, take this to the chemist and get this filled, and you will be able to be cured from your disease. If you're sick, you don't go to the grocer's shop, you don't go to the pub, you don't go to the village idiot and ask him what I should do about my disease. You go to the doctor. So you go to someone who's qualified, and then when the doctor gives you the prescription, you have to follow it, because along with the prescription, you get the pills from the chemist, and it says, take 3 pills 3 times a day after meals, and continue to take them until the whole bottle is used up. And you think, that's such a waste of time. I'm so over being ill. I know. I'll take the whole bottle, take them all at once, and then I'll get better quicker. The instructions on the bottle also says, avoid alcohol and don't drive heavy machinery while taking this medicine. So you think, no, I know better. I'll drive to the bottle shop and I'll buy a few pints and I'll wash down my whole bottle of medicine and take it all at once. So you may have a relapse, or you may even die. So you don't speculate when the doctor tells you to take the medicine in a certain way. You have to take it according to the instructions of the bottle. So there's do's and there's don'ts. Take this medicine a certain number of times a day and avoid this and avoid that. So that's the same in spiritual life. We have to avoid the do-nots and we have to embrace the do's. And that brings us to point number 9. One should completely refrain from practices which are detrimental to the interests of self-realization. Just like if you have hepatitis. I remember when I was a young devotee in 1973 in Sydney. One devotee came back from India. They had hepatitis, I think, the mild form of hepatitis. What is it called? B or A? A. And I shared breakfast with him. He gave me a samosa from his plate, a half-bitten samosa. That was the problem. And he had hepatitis. He didn't know at the time. And then I caught hepatitis, and then I had to go to hospital. When I was on travelling book distribution in Perth, and I was cooking the Sunday feast, and I was thinking, I don't feel very well. I was stirring the tomato chutney, and I was thinking, I can't even stir this pot anymore, and I just put the spoon down and I went to sleep in the middle of the kitchen floor, only to be woken up by this smell of burning tomato chutney. And next day I went to the doctor, and I walked into the doctor's surgery. Actually, I walked into the emergency, and I got within 10 feet of the desk, and she said, "You've got hepatitis," because my eyes were bright yellow. And the first thing you have to stop eating when you have hepatitis is anything fried. You can't have anything fried, and that was the strict rule, and I had to go on a very, very strict diet, and I was in hospital, so I couldn't get anything that I wanted to eat anyway. So you have to avoid things which are unfavourable to your condition. So just like when you're sick, you have to avoid certain foods. In spiritual life, it's considered that we are forgetful of our real identity, so in one sense we're sick, we're in some sort of deluded condition. We have to avoid things which will give us a relapse. So therefore in the Bhakti tradition, in the Hare Krishna movement, the Guru, the spiritual master, says that if you're serious about taking up spiritual life. You have to chant the Hare Krishna mantra a certain number of times a day. You shouldn't sleep too much. You should get up early before the sunrise. You should avoid bad company. Don't eat meat. Don't eat non-vegetarian foods. Only eat sanctified foods, prasadam, that have been offered to Krishna. Don't take drugs. Don't drink alcohol. Don't gamble. Control your lust. Get married. Don't be greedy. Be enthusiastic. Be determined. Associate with other spiritually minded persons. So these are do's and don'ts. And in spiritual life there has to be do's and don'ts if we want the process to work. And that brings us to number 10. One should not accept more than he requires for the maintenance of the body. And that's very important. Now, if you look at the state of the world today, and the state of the world is not good, as you all know, it seems to have deteriorated a lot in the last few years. We're not imagining things. So modern society has suffered greatly from not following this advice. Number 10. Don't accept more than you need. Modern society, with its so-called culture of knowledge, in other words, we think we know what should be done, but really this is the culture of nescience. And through the agents of education, modern education, you could say so-called education, such as the education system, which proposes to know what should be done and what shouldn't be done, under the auspices and the advice of our modern education systems throughout the world, and through enhanced by social media and telecommunications in general, TV, film, we're made to think that the goal of life is to go to school and study hard, then get secondary education, further education, go to university, get a degree, and if you get a degree you can get a good job, and if you get a good job you can have lots of money, and then if you have lots of money you can eat whatever you want, whenever you want, you can drink whatever you want, buy whatever you want, whenever you want, and you'll be happy. Basically that's the basic premise of the modern education system in a nutshell. Get a good job and you'll be happy. Because then you'll need a good car, you'll need a new car, you'll need a better phone, a new phone, a bigger house, stylish clothes, you'll want to watch the latest. That will make you happy. That's really the bottom line. And then when everyone's consuming like anything, then they'll be distracted from the real problems of life. But we see that actually this is not making anyone happy. People are more disturbed than ever. Actually, if you look at previous generations, you will find, despite any propaganda from modern, those who are promoting this modern system of life, actually people were happier previously. I was watching an old documentary on the internet the other day of, it was one of the first moving films that were taken. It was taken in Berlin in 1903 by an early filmmaker. And the first thing I noticed, there was about 5 minutes of footage. I noticed there were no fat people. Everyone's slim and trim. The men are all wearing stylish jackets and the ladies are wearing nice skirts. Everyone has nice bodily features. They're all trim and slim. No fat people. And the fact is that everyone, everyone was working hard, everyone was walking, and they were slimmer, they were trimmer, they were actually suffering from less chronic diseases than today, even though the medical profession will make you believe that it's not the case. They were less depressed, they were living on the land, they were growing their food, they were satisfied, they were more healthy, and led a more productive life. So this is, our modern society has a lot to answer for, and a lot has to do with this point number 10, accepting more than what we really need. And it's at fever pitch. So Upanishad is requesting us to step back from that lifestyle and take look at ourselves and take a look at what we really need. How many cars do we need, and how many sets of shoes do we need? If we've got 35 sets of shoes in the cupboard, do we actually need 35 sets of shoes, etc. Anyway, so that brings us to point number 11. One should not falsely identify himself with the gross material body, nor should one consider those who are related to this body to be his own. This is why society is the way it is today, because of identifying with this body. I am this body. And this leads to so many problems in the form of isms. Isms. Capitalism, nationalism, socialism, communism, chauvinism, feminism, materialism. All these isms are based on that thinking that this body is me. And it extends into the field of religious life as well. I am a Hindu. I'm a Jew. I'm a Muslim. I'm a Christian. I'm an atheist. I'm a rationalist. I'm a voidist. In fact, you're none of those things. You're not a Catholic. You're not a Protestant. You're not gay. You're not straight. You're not a Democrat or a Republican. You're not Irish. You're not British. You're not Israeli. You're not Palestinian. You're none of those things. Those things pertain to this body, but that's not you. You are not this body. And that is a profound realization to understand. We are actually tiny spiritual sparks that live within this body, called the soul. And we are a soul, and we're not this body. So you may say, moving on to number 12, you may say, okay, I accept all that. That makes sense. I understand. I understand that we're not this body. I understand that we're a soul, at least theoretically. But why is life so hard? Why is life so difficult, you may ask? I have to work hard because I have to support the family. And I get sick sometimes. My children get sick. My mother died. My father died. My grandparents have died. My uncle died. There's war. There's terrorist attacks. There's mass outbreaks of disease. There's natural disasters. It's like in Mozambique at the moment. You hardly read about it. Massive, horrendous flooding. But if you rely on the media, you only get things that the media wants you to read about. But in fact, at any one time, there's terrible, horrendous things going on. Individually, with someone that we know, someone we know just was killed in a car accident, someone we know has just been diagnosed with cancer, and on the world stage, so much nonsense and chaos. So what do we do about that? Okay, I understand all this stuff about spiritual life, but what do we do about this suffering? And that brings us to point number 12. One should always remember that as long as he or she has a material body, he must face the miseries of repeated birth, old age, disease, and death. You must face them. Now that sounds very cruel. Well, in one sense it is, because this is a cruel world. There is no use, it says here, there is no use in making plans to get rid of these miseries of the material body. The best course is to find out the means by which one may regain his spiritual identity. So Krishna explains to Arjuna that the culture of knowledge includes accepting the way that the world is. Now you may say, well, that's not. Surely we should do something about it. Well, you can do things, you can do some things about some things, but the general tendency is that there will always be death, there will always be disease. You may wipe out one disease, but there'll be another disease, and everybody gets old, and everybody dies. So complaining and trying to fix it, in one sense, is pointless. Because, and the example is given, just like in jail. If you're in jail, you may have a meeting with other prisoners when you're out there in the yard and you say, look, this is just terrible. Did you taste that breakfast this morning? It's shocking, horrible. This is a horrible place. You have a meeting, you decide you're going to have a riot, or you try to break out of the jail. But the fact is that you're in jail, and life in jail is meant to be bad. It's set up that way. You get horrible food, and well, it's, I don't know about these days. When I was in jail, I was thrown in jail when I was a young boy for being a Hare Krishna, and I didn't eat any food, so I fasted for 6 days. So I didn't have to complain about the food, but that's another story. You may complain that life in jail is bad, but the fact is that you're in jail and it's meant to be that way. Similarly, we're in this material world. The material world is meant to be the way it is. It's called planned obsolescence. You buy a car and you know that as soon as you have a little accident and bump into something, you're going to have a big dent, there's going to be a big scratch, and then you're going to have to replace the car. It will break down after a certain number of years. In the early days, they built cars that lasted forever, but then they realised this is not going to work for the motor industry because no one will buy any new cars. So they started to make them flimsier and thinner. It's meant to be like this so that we become inspired to get out of here. Just like if you're in jail, you should be inspired to act in such a way that you can be given parole and be let out of jail. So similarly, spiritual life means it's your get out of jail card. Get out of jail free, although you do have to pay a little. Everything's fine? Okay. We cannot actually hang on to any of these things because it's all on loan to us, and we have to give it back at death. Imagine if you went home after the Sunday feast and you died this evening. Not a happy thought. Sorry to bring that up. But imagine, you've got a whole house full of furniture, you've got a whole cupboard full of stuff, you've got an office, you've got a garage with all this stuff and all those boxes of things that you never had time to go through. And imagine all of a sudden you've gone and all your stuff is here, left behind. What's going to happen? Or your friends will come over with your family and they'll go through everything. Your family may fight over some of your things. And then whatever's left over, they give it away to charity or it gets thrown into big black bags and put into the rubbish. So that's what actually happens to all our stuff. We can have so much stuff, but what are we going to do with it? Because after a certain amount of time, and that time will come, all of a sudden, we don't have that stuff anymore, and someone else has got it. Point number 14, one should not be more attached to wife, children, and home than the revealed scriptures ordain. As far as detachment from children, wife, and home, it is not meant that we don't have any feelings for our family. The family is a natural. Family members are a natural object of affection. But we should try to encourage our family members to also embark on the spiritual path with us. So we can sit down with our family members and we can chant Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. We can have kirtan, we can chant at home, we can worship Krishna at home, we can read spiritual literature at home, we can eat vegetarian food and offer vegetarian food to Krishna and share it with the family and friends. So we can make our family intertranscendentalists also. And you may say, yes, but my family are not interested in spiritual life. So it's hard. It happens. Yes, the wife is interested, the husband's not, or the children are not interested. So it becomes very difficult. It's a very difficult problem. Sometimes families don't all see eye to eye in the same things. The bottom line is that, and this is one of those axioms, if you like, that I found in one of Prabhupada's books, the Bhagavad Gita in the purport, that you could this could be your motto of life. This could be something you could put on a t-shirt, or you could make a tattoo of this on your arm. It is, one can never be fully happy or fully miserable in this world.
Yeah.
One can never be fully happy or fully miserable in this life, in this world. We try for happiness and we get some happiness, but we get a bit of misery mixed in. And it's miserable and we think, oh, this is so miserable, I can't take it anymore. But you should know that if it's bad, and life will be bad, because life will throw all sorts of things at us, we should know that it can also get better. So it's bad, but it can get better, and it's nice, but it can get worse. So we should be a little detached. So that brings us to point number 15. One should not be happy or distressed over desirables and undesirables, knowing that such feelings are just created by the mind. The mind is causing us so many troubles. We become very attached to being happy, but then that happiness goes away. We become so depressed that life is so bad, we want to end our life, and sometimes, unfortunately, people do. But we should know that life can be bad, but it won't always be bad. And life is good, but it won't always be good. Therefore, we just have to step back, and we have to be a little bit detached. Life will be sometimes too hot, too cold. There will be fights, there will be disagreements, there will be illness, there will be make-ups and breakups. These things will come. We have to learn the art of rolling with the punches, as they say, but definitely punches will come. Number 16, one should become an unalloyed devotee of the personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna, and serve him with rapt attention. So the Upanishad is encouraging us to get out of jail. We've been in this material world for so long. We've forgotten what life is like on the outside. So we have to take up the worship of Krishna and remember who we really are. Reawaken our spiritual identity and join our real family in the spiritual sky. And in the meantime, while we're here in the material world, number 17, one should develop a liking for residence in a secluded place with a calm and quiet atmosphere, favourable for spiritual culture, and one should avoid congested places where non-devotees or materialistic persons congregate. Just like this temple, this is a good example of a calm and quiet place with a spiritual atmosphere, favourable for spiritual culture. Just like you've all very kindly, and I thank you for all coming today and giving oral reception to what we're discussing. And hopefully, when you come away from tonight, after hearing and chanting and taking nice spiritual food, you will feel rejuvenated. I remember when I used to visit the Sunday feast when I was a schoolboy. I was 17 and I was still at school, and I would turn up to the Sunday feast in my school uniform. And I used to then chant and hear the class and eat the incredible food, and I used to go home and I was just like, I felt like I was walking on clouds. You know that feeling? I feel like it's been a very wonderful spiritual experience. So that is, which you can experience that here in the temple. And you can also make your home into a temple and then give your whole family members an opportunity. But we should be attracted to calm, quiet, spiritual places, and we should visit them as often as we can to get a proper balance in life. Birds of a feather flock together. We're all here this evening because we all have some reason to be here. Otherwise we wouldn't be sitting down together. And finally, point 18, one should become a scientist or a philosopher and conduct research into spiritual knowledge, recognizing that spiritual knowledge is permanent, whereas material knowledge ends with the death of the body. So one should become a spiritual scientist and a spiritual philosopher. That means we should study the spiritual literatures that we spoke about earlier. Study the Vedas. Our spiritual master has given us wonderful literatures, such as the Sri Upanishad. You should all take a copy of Sri Upanishad. This is Premanava. He's just come back from India. You may have seen Premanava. He used to cook the Sunday feasts here. Spectacular Sunday feasts, and he's visiting for a short while. Premanava Prabhu has brought back some nice printings of Sri Upanishad with that beautiful picture of Lord Vishnu on the front. If you want to know more about the subject we're talking about tonight, please take a copy of Sri Upanishad. Premanava is going to be going around with copies, hopefully, and you can take one and give a small donation. So read these books. Cultivate spiritual knowledge. So these 18 items that we've discussed tonight combine to form a gradual process by which we can make advancement into the world of real knowledge, spiritual knowledge. And as defined in the verse, which you're going to scroll back and show us finally, one should understand that there's a difference between the culture of knowledge and the culture of nations. Anything that is not under the banner, go up a bit, oh there it is. The wise have explained that one result is derived from the culture of knowledge and that a different result is obtained from the culture of nations. So summing up, we've read from verse 10 of the Sri Upanishad. We've read that there are wise men called Dhiras who are fully in control of their senses. They have explained that there's a difference between the culture of knowledge and the culture of nations. We should learn the difference between the two. We should learn which is real knowledge and which is really going to benefit us, and we should avoid that so-called knowledge which is detrimental for our spiritual life. Modern education is based on the faulty premise that we're this body, and that has furthered the material concept, bodily concept of life, and that has led to all sorts of problems. And finally, we all crave for light to guide us on the path to our destinations in life, and that we should understand is the spiritual world. This material world is not our real home. So Upanishad is reminding us that if we want to understand more about this subject, we should study the Vedic literatures. And finally, the great Kavi or poet, Krishna Das Kaviraj Goswami, has sung Krishna Surya Sama Maya Haya Andakara Yahan Krishna Tahan Nohi Mayara Adikara. Godhead is light. Nescience is darkness. Where there is Godhead, there is no darkness. So we'll finish there. Does anyone have any questions or comments or anything to add? Yes.